From the end of World War II to 1991, the world's two greatest superpowers opposed each other across the globe. They called it the Cold War. It meant indirect wars, fought on almost every continent. A prolonged arms race posed the additional threat of a direct conflict between the two powers. In 1962, in fact, America came close to nuclear war with the Soviet Union. How close? As close as Cuba. 90 miles off the southern tip of Florida, Soviet missiles were ready to launch, and America was the target. At the end of World War II, the victorious Allies agreed that Germany should be one nation, but the Russian plan called for the German state to be communist. On June 24, 1948, the Soviet Union blockaded all land and water routes into West Berlin, cutting off over 2 million residents from essential supplies. The intent was to force the Western Allies to relinquish their sectors of the city. The Allies responded with an unprecedented humanitarian effort, the Berlin Airlift. For 15 months, from June 1948 to May 1949, American and British pilots flew over 277,000 flights, delivering food, coal, and other vital necessities to West Berlin. The monumental undertaking sustained the beleaguered Germans there and became a powerful symbol of Western resolve against Soviet expansionism. On May 12, 1949, the Soviets relented and lifted the blockade. In October, however, they established East Germany, a communist regime known officially as the German Democratic Republic. It covered all the post-war Soviet occupation zone. West Berlin remained the one free sector in the eastern half of Germany. When, in 1960, John F. Kennedy was elected president, American forces were still stationed in West Berlin. And to the Soviets, the Americans were too close to the city's east side. 1 year earlier, Fidel Castro had led a successful communist revolution in Cuba. This meant that a little less than 100 miles from the coast of America, the Soviets had a staunch and aggressive member of their bloc. Kennedy considered an assassination of Castro. Instead, he backed an invasion designed by the CIA. On April 17, 1961, 1,400 Cuban exiles, trained by America, invaded Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. The expedition was a disaster, due in some measure to the fact that Kennedy reversed his decision to provide air cover for the invading forces. 2 months later, JFK met with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. The Russian dominated his American counterpart. "He savaged me," Kennedy told New York Times reporter James Reston. Khrushchev threatened to cut off Berlin if the president did not remove American troops. Kennedy responded by calling up Army reserves and the National Guard. The Soviet leader countered by erecting the Berlin Wall, at first made of barbed wire, but later of concrete. By the spring of 1962, American nuclear-tipped Jupiter missiles were operational in Turkey, within easy reach of major targets in the Soviet Union. In the fall of 1962, the temperature of the Cold War rose to an unprecedented level. American reconnaissance planes discovered that the Soviets had placed medium-range missiles on the island of Cuba. Khrushchev was now in a position to strike American targets as far as 1,200 miles away, including Washington, D.C., or any city in the southeastern part of the United States. On October 22nd, Kennedy appeared on national television to report the presence of the missiles on Cuba. He issued a quarantine on the island, a naval blockade intended to stop the delivery of further missiles and to force the Soviets to withdraw the ones already there. Kennedy also warned what would happen if the Soviets fired a missile on the United States or on any other country in the Western Hemisphere.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
On October 24th, Soviet ships approached the American naval blockade, driving tensions to their highest. Some ships were allowed to proceed as they were not carrying offensive weapons. Others turned back before reaching the blockade. On October 28th, 6 days after Kennedy's speech, Khrushchev agreed to remove the Soviet missiles from Cuba. Fidel Castro was livid. He tried repeatedly to insert himself into the negotiations that ended the conflicts surrounding his island nation, but Castro's role remained marginal. On his part, the victorious Kennedy quietly agreed to remove the U.S. missiles from Turkey. The crisis had broken. America was spared a nuclear attack. As Secretary of State Dean Russ remarked, the Soviets and the Americans had stared each other down, eyeball to eyeball, and they blinked first.